think President Humala, he covered the basic principles that will lead our administration. So here, I'm just going to go and detail some of the of our ideas, our policies, and I look forward also to a Q&A session where I'll be able to address some of your concerns, questions, suggestions. Please. Well, it's for no one, it's a secret that Peru has been one of the most dynamic economies in the world. We are along the Chinas and the Indias of this world, with growth, sustained growth in the past decade of over 70% growth during that period. So definitely Peru is one of the most dynamic countries in the world. And one of the key and the main objectives of our administration is to keep things that way. This has come with stability. Here is Governor Velarde, and thanks to his good job and his predecessors, I think Peru can boast as being one of the countries with most crisis stability. And he's the envy of some of the neighbors. Finance Minister Echeverri was in Lima last week, and he was trying to find out, and he's member of the board of the Central Bank of Colombia, and he was wondering, what does Velarde do to keep the exchange rate so stable and low inflation, and I think a key factor that the President mentioned is central bank autonomy and credibility of economic agents regarding that autonomy. So I think it's important to keep that. I think this is one of the main assets that we have in our country and in the economic management of our country. Our central bank independence and the quality of the analysis. And we are working very close together, although sometimes there may be some differences, but I think there are more points of convergence, and we're definitely a team working together, each in managing the right policy mix for our country. Obviously, as a result of this dynamic growth in our country, things have changed tremendously. You look at the graph, and per capita terms, GDP has grown. It's been the episode past decade of the fastest growth in our history since we have reasonable data. Since 1950s, GDP per capita growth has exceeded 4.5% over the decade. And I think this is something very commendable, and it's something that must be kept. And with this growth, we've been able to recover the time that was lost. And I remember always saying that the 80s was Latin America's lost decade. Actually, Peru had 3 lost decades. And it's only until recently that we've been able to catch up and recover to the levels that we had in the early 70s. And obviously, that growth has definitely led to poverty alleviation. As the President mentioned, poverty has, monetary policy, but poverty has gone down. However, there are many challenges remaining. And I think we have a very, very good platform to build upon to tackle those challenges, which I think are shared by most Peruvians. And let me just highlight some. I don't pretend to cover all topics, because I would, be here for more than needed. But just to give you a feeling of what are the main priorities that we have. One is, as President Humala mentioned, social inclusion. I would stress broad-based development is what we need in our country. It's a country with vast asymmetries, which have been narrowing, but still large gaps remain. one looks at the difference between the national poverty rate and the rural poverty rate, and there is a major difference. Now, last year it was double the rural poverty rate in comparison to the national average. There's been a slight improvement, but still these numbers really are very telling of the asymmetry in the development of our country that we're trying to address and tackle. Obviously, we need to strive for poverty eradication. This may not be fulfilled within the next 5 years, but we must for sure definitely have that as an objective as a country, to eradicate poverty. Obviously beginning with extreme poverty. And the policies that are being pursued in a gradual but very focalized way, trying to lift out of poverty those 900 districts out of close to 1,837 districts where poverty prevails. Even very close to Lima, one sees extreme poverty. And this is something that needs to change. I think there is a broad consensus that this map needs to be less red and more pink, for sure. Another issue is, a challenge is to reduce child malnutrition. This is particularly important. Last night, we were talking with a group of people at a very interesting session about the importance of education and about the importance of developing cognitive capacities. But this thing comes in a combo. You need good education, but you need well-nourished children in the outset, when they're babies and when they're little kids, because that's when the formation of cognitive capacities occurs. So definitely we must strive to reduce child malnutrition, and especially in rural areas. There's been progress, but much more is needs to be done. 1/3 of the children in rural areas suffer from malnutrition. That's a fact. And there have been improvements, but definitely not enough. Actually, it's interesting, when we discuss with rating agencies different macroeconomic indicators for a peer of countries that with the same rating, Peru exceeds in having low debt levels, high surpluses, high reserves. But if one were to compare the social indicators of the same peer groups with the same rating, Peru is an outlier, and that must change. And we must, as someone mentioned at one time, not only have investment grade in the traditional sense, but have investment grade in the social sense. And that's what we're trying to work very intensively in this government. Critical is the quality of public education, because I think there's been a vast improvement in terms of coverage, and there's still ways to go in terms of initial education coverage. But really, this is one of the main obstacles and potential bottlenecks for growth. And this is obviously the best way to achieve social mobility is through education. And not education, but good education. And if we look at the PISA scores, and we look at how our kids, the results of the examinations and reading, math, science tests, unfortunately, Peru needs to work this as a policy, state, something critical that combines both social inclusion and being able to be productive and have a job in the labor market in the future. So the quality of education is critical, and it's an objective of our government to improve it. Obviously, gaps have been closed, but still in infrastructure, still there's lots to be done. But if one looks at the aggregate figure, it might be a bit misleading, because there are still huge gaps, once again, between our rural and our urban areas in terms of access to electricity, sanitation, drinking water. And this really must change. If we're able to achieve important improvements in these areas, most definitely the whole model will consolidate and will be sustained in the future. So this is the agenda that we need to tackle. Prime Minister Lerner, in his speech in Congress, he identified 4 horizons that are going to lead the main policies of our administration. And let me just quote them, and let me just elaborate on some of them in which the ministry and the economic team has responsibility. One is growth with social inclusion and democracy. And here are powerful words, growth with social inclusion and democracy. One looks at the Asian case and one admires, the Asian miracle, the tigers. But then one ponders about the democratic, nature of those regimes sometimes. So really, we need to work on this first horizon in democracy, and this is very, very important to stress. The second, which was stressed by President Humala, equal rights, opportunities, and social goals in line with the UN Millennium Development Goals. And actually, in some fronts here, we've had tremendous progress, and we've already met some of the goals that were set for 2015 already, but not for all. A third horizon, which was mentioned, is that we are a broad-based government that seeks to solve problems and tackle challenges, building consensus. I think this is very important. We have experienced a lot of polarization in our society. And I think it's time really to put differences aside and to think as Peruvians and to achieve consensus. I'm sure most Peruvians would agree upon the issues I'm mentioning. And a fourth very important aspect is, as in the Prime Minister's own words, a historical reconciliation with rural Peru. Progress has been concentrated in urban areas. But if one looks at rural areas, in the highlands, in the jungle, and really the picture isn't as rosy as one may think. There's been progress, there's been convergence, catching up, but still we have ways to go. What are the main principles of economic policy for the next 5 years? And here I'm going to emphasize some. Obviously, this is a list that is not exhaustive, that doesn't by any means plan to list all the issues. The Minister of Health is here, and he can probably give us a whole presentation about his agenda, about the policies he's going to be pursuing in the next 5 years. But these are some of the issues that we want to have a clear emphasis in during our mandate and during our administration. Social inclusion, poverty reduction, growth with macroeconomic stability, which is key for anything, I think. And the President highlighted that. Productivity growth and enhancing competitiveness to maintain GDP growth above 6% on average. To this, I would add taking advantage of the free trade agreements that Peru has signed. Between 2 governments, the 2 previous governments have really invested a lot of effort. And I see here Calero and others that have really worked